The maid will appear at the stairs in 2 minutes, and all I had to do was... I leaned against the wall and counted her moans until the sound of my father's shoes came from the den. They questioned me about why, and I opened my mouth but couldn't speak. This is the 7th time I've pushed down Mary, or rather the 7th time I tried to snuff out the source of the flu. The first few times I was reborn, I always saw my brother Teddy's purple lips and heard my mother's heartbreaking cries from the hospital bed. But this time was different, and on the way to my psychiatrist's appointment, I purposely fell behind to pick up that glove. The shrill whine of a car horn grazed between my ears. The brakes dragged scorch marks on the asphalt, and I dodged the crash of my last life. I got my first good look at the wallpaper in the psychiatrist's office, a light grey with a fine gold stripe, like the snow that had roiled the sky when I died in my previous life. "You said you dreamed of dying many times." The doctor's pen hovered over his notebook, ink smudging the page with small clusters of shadows. I stared at the sapphire on his tie clip, and suddenly remembered that Nurse's cufflinks were the same colour that snowy night in 1918. I was coughing up blood and froth while she was busy giving fever-reducing injections to rich children. Mary's cuffs were caked with soot and germs the day she returned from London. My nails pinched into my palms. Teddy would die, Mum would go crazy, Dad would drink a bullet in the den. I've seen all of these before. The doctor's lenses flashed with reflections, and the penny finally dropped. Post-traumatic stress disorder. The sycamore leaves were swooping against the glass outside the window when he said this, like the branches that had crossed my eyes when I fell in previous lives. But this time, I didn't argue. Perhaps feigning insanity was a survival strategy, at least in an age where female hysteria can always be chalked up to neurosis. In this life, I survived smoothly until I was 16. The first time Robert, the good brother my brother brought home, brushed his palm across my waistline in the rose garden, it made my cheeks burn to fantasize that it was a light touch of fate. The second time, when he pressed me against the cold wall, his belt buckle hurting me, a wall away was the even breathing of my parents asleep, shouting unspoken pleas for help that changed to stoic sobs.
English girls, you really are something.
He disappeared. My mother stared at my new sundress and teased that I looked like a blown-up balloon lately. No one noticed the secret I was hiding under the dress. At 3 a.m, I stepped onto that train. The damp London fog smelled of my Aunt Isabel's perfume. She reassured me that it was okay, that I would just sleep and wake up. The lights in the underground clinic are cold white, illuminating the bloodstains on the doctor's sleeve. The anesthesia mask snaps up like a piece of ice. The smell of disinfectant mixed with peppermint tea wafts from my aunt's apartment, and I lie on the creaky iron bed, watching the sunlight weave broken patches of light across the curtains. Each breath tugged at the wound in my lower abdomen, and the pain went black. The fever came without warning. Sometime around midnight, I woke up from a spasm to see my mom standing in a halo of light, her shadow drawn by the wall sconce. "You disappoint me so much," her voice pierced through the chaos. I suddenly smiled as the familiar snowflakes fell, and death did not come. I burned my school uniform after I was discharged from the hospital. The fabric curled into the shape of a butterfly in the flames, like the teenage years I had snuffed out. On a cold, rainy morning, I boarded the train. It was my first real escape, from the rose garden on the estate, from my mother's lustful gaze, from all the snowy landscapes with their deathly forebodings. I moved into a shabby apartment and enrolled in a course to learn how to type. I thought everything could start over, only the malice hidden in the shadows aimed at me once more. So I didn't dare to rip off the black cloth, let alone make a sound. The whiskey bottle rolled across the floor with a hollow clatter. When the throat burns, Robert's hand unbuckling his belt comes to mind, overlapping with the silver buttons on the cuffs of his typing class teacher. The umbrella on that rainy day was smoky grey, and the moment he crouched down to pick up the scattered letterhead and his fingertips traced my wrist, it was like I believed in love again. At the wedding, my father's coughing drowned out the priest's benediction, and my mother turned her face away from the saints in the church's coloured windows. Little did we know that the man who called himself a writer carried in his pockets not manuscripts, but loan-sharking IOUs. His so-called vast fortune was nothing more than a set of faded curtains in a rented apartment. On our wedding night, he stared at the scars on my abdomen and suddenly looked grave.
I know you're not used to cooking, so I'm expecting a few burnt dinners, but...
I'll make some. I started circling the kitchen and the ironing board, which I thought, at the time, was a necessary part of every woman's journey in marriage. The first time I was beaten was after signing up for tennis lessons.
Didn't I tell you that I've already spent all of my money on you? I bought you an entire house.
The hard table slammed into my stomach and I was in so much pain, I didn't have the strength to retort. The tearing sensation made me laugh. It turns out that the abuser and the tender heart are just two sides of the same coin. The bank debt collector's knock on the door was like a heavy hammer on the nerves.
He owes us a great deal of money and has ceased to respond to our communications. But unless it is found, the bank will retake ownership over this here house.
Mr. Oliphant is writing a book. I can talk to him about securing an advance of sales.
And his so-called manuscript was nothing more than scrap paper filled with expletives written in red pen, sandwiched between 3 pawnshop receipts. The rain at the time of the escape was colder than the day we met. I climbed up with my last bit of strength, dragging the blood that had not yet dried, and escaped from this endless abyss. And my aunt took me in like she had countless times before. During my time at my aunt's house, I pieced together my broken self a little and seemed to have the courage to start over. The doorbell rang in the middle of the night, a cold wind swirling snow particles into my arms, and Teddy's scarf swept across the corners of my crusted mouth with a familiar cedar scent.
You're all grown up.
I know. Look. I've got muscles too.
We haven't seen each other in more years than I care to remember. His palm was still the warmth of memory as we danced to the phonograph. But the next second, the loud bang of the door lock being slammed open ripped away all the warmth. The force of his grip on my neck was more real than any death in my previous life. In the melee, I saw the snow from my first birth overlapping with the snowflakes falling on my palm at that moment. The amniotic fluid at rebirth was colder than I remembered. This time of rebirth, I still only have fragmented memories. Perhaps it is the pain of my previous life that condensed into anger. In this life, I did not endure it, but fought back.
English girls, you really are something.
The sharp gasp sounded behind me as the black cloth blinded my eyes in typing class. I tore off the black cloth and let all the girls see the face together.
Blindfolds off, ladies.
Then firmly got up and opened the door so that the stinking insects in the gutter had nowhere to hide and were judged and spat upon in the sunlight. Later, I relied on my own efforts to enter the government sector. In my spare time, I will also often go home to play with my naughty nephews, to be ambitious with my rogue brother, and to feel the warmth of my brother's love.
I'm here to rescue my sister.
I have long forgotten how many times I have reincarnated. Shortly after the war began, my brother brought back news.
Ted's caught one, I'm afraid.
Caught what?
Ted's plane has gone down.
That family member, who would stand up for me every time and protect me now, had no bones left. This was the first time after countless reincarnations that I experienced the loss of a close family member.
Well then, we'll find him.
I couldn't believe that a living person just disappeared without a word.
I'm going to get him back.
What?
I'll get him back.
This sadness until I was grey-haired and left the world with regret. I was reborn again, with fragmented memories. Before my brother enlisted in the army, I felt vaguely uneasy, but the words came to my mouth. But I forgot to say anything, and I could only watch his figure disappear into the night.
Teddy!
The war came anyway. During an air raid, my father's soldiers and civilians and I hid in bomb shelters. Everyone was trembling in fear. To calm a woman with a baby, I took her child. In this life, before I could do anything, I was like dust melting into the broken walls. This time I was reborn again and became a rescuer. The bloodstains on the rescuer's uniform can never be washed away. When I kneel in the rubble and pull out the rubble, I will always wonder if there is a slight mistake in fate and I will be the one lying there. In a sense, it's kind of a miss come true. I still didn't escape that air raid. Starting over more and more often, I can change very little. And even every time I go down a new road, I get a worse result. I was tired. When I started again, I began to become incredibly sensitive, and I was afraid to try anything, still following the surest path to become a government employee. In this life, in the same office at the same point in time, the news of my brother's death came again, and although it seemed like I had foreseen it, I broke down. I hated myself for not being able to think of it, for not being able to stop it sooner, for not having the power to change it all. On a snowy night, I smelled the cedar scent of Teddy's sweater as the wind from the edge of a tall building poured into my collar. The moment I fell, I saw a million of myself running through the snow. The little girl who pushed down Mary, the teenage girl with a high fever after an abortion, the wife holding up the ironing board, the woman jumping off the building at this very moment, and the woman who collapsed after practicing hard at marksmanship to slay the devil in another life. Every snowflake is a me. Some learn to fear, some learn to hold back, some learn to run away, and this time I finally learned to let go. In the morning light of my 15th rebirth, I suddenly realized that the original rebirth doesn't have to be repaired and redeemed, but it can also be to relive those beautiful moments around my family.
Teddy?
That's it.
What?
I felt for the first time in a long time that I was living in the present. I remembered that in a past life, I had heard the same words.
A love of fate. It means simple acceptance of what comes to us, regarding it as neither bad nor good.
On the last snowy night, I sat in my aunt's old house and listened to the wood crackling in the fireplace. The snowflakes were still falling outside the window, but this time I felt no fear. Death is not the end, but another form of reunion. In the wheel of fate we will eventually meet, we will eventually be reconciled, and we will eventually walk together one snowy night toward the morning light of eternity.